Hey there, everybody. Ready to dive into some fascinating research? Today, we're going to be exploring how ability and motivation work together to influence job performance.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right.
It's a question people have been wrestling with for ages. Like, does having tons of motivation actually boost your abilities? Or are they kind of separate things that just add up?
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to dig into a bunch of studies and really try to unpack this debate, especially this one meta-analysis from 2018 that really shook things up.
Oh, yeah, I know the one you're talking about. It sparked a ton of discussion. This is important stuff, though, because understanding how these things connect can totally change how we approach things like hiring, training, even talent development. Big implications.
No kidding. Okay, so before we jump into the controversy, let's set the stage. For a long time, people generally thought that ability and motivation had like a multiplicative effect on performance.
Right. The idea was that motivation could supercharge your abilities.
Yeah, like if you have someone with high ability but low motivation, they won't reach their potential. But if you amp up that motivation, boom, their abilities shine through and their performance goes way up.
Make sense? Yeah.
Totally. And actually, there's a lot of research that back this up. Some of the big names in psychology, like Room back in '64 and then Locke and Latham in the '90s, they did some really important work on this. Their research basically shaped the way we think about motivation and setting goals.
Absolutely foundational stuff. But then this meta-analysis from 2018 came along by a researcher named Aguinis and his team.
Agreedness.
Yeah, Aguinis. It rhymes with beer.
Gotcha. Agreedness. So what did they find that was so different?
Well, they used this statistical method called moderated multiple regression, or MMR. And their analysis basically pointed to a primarily additive relationship between ability and motivation.
Wait, hold on. Additive. So you're saying instead of multiplying each other, they just sort of add up.
Yeah. Exactly. Like they each contribute to performance on their own instead of one boosting the other. It was a pretty big departure from what people had always assumed.
Wow, yeah. I can see why that caused a stir. So people weren't exactly thrilled with this new idea.
You could say that. In 2021, another group of researchers led by Vancouver came out and basically challenged Aguinis' whole approach. They argued that there were actually much stronger interaction effects than Aguinis had found.
Oh, so a real scientific showdown.
Okay.
Okay, so what was Vancouver's beef with the 2018 study? What didn't they like?
Well, their main argument was that the statistical method Aguinis used, that MMR, might actually be hiding the real strength of those interaction effects between ability and motivation.
So they're saying the tool itself could be part of the problem.
Hmm.
Clever. But I bet Aguinis and his team had something to say about that, right?
Well, you know they did. They defended their use of MMR, saying it's a totally valid and widely accepted method for testing these kinds of interactions. And to prove their point, they even went back and reanalyzed all their data using the method that Vancouver's team preferred.
Okay, so they tried it both ways. Interesting. And what happened when they used this different method? Did it change their conclusions at all?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. So they reran the numbers using Vancouver's method.
Right.
And guess what? Those significant interaction effects, they were only there in a tiny percentage of cases.
Oh, really? Like how tiny are we talking?
Something like 10% max,
Hmm.
which isn't exactly a ringing endorsement for the whole motivation as a multiplier idea. And here's the kicker. A lot of those interactions weren't even going in the direction you'd expect, like if motivation was truly boosting ability.
Huh. Interesting. So even when they tried it Vancouver's way, the results still mostly pointed back to that additive model. It sounds like this whole debate has some pretty big implications for how we think about work and performance, right?
Absolutely. This isn't just some academic thing. It really gets to the heart of how we view talent and what companies should be focusing on.
Okay, I'm all ears. So let's break it down. What does all this mean for someone who's just trying to navigate their career or manage a team? Like, how do we actually apply this stuff?
Well, for one thing, it challenges this idea that's been around forever, that if you just pump up everyone's motivation, their abilities will automatically skyrocket.
So it's not as easy as just giving everyone a pep talk and expecting miracles.
Nope. It's more nuanced than that. It seems like we need to focus on both ability and motivation, but as separate things.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's like making sure both engines are running smoothly instead of just trying to soup up one of them. But how do we actually put that into practice?
Well, if you're in charge of a team, it's not enough to just try and motivate people with like speeches and a free pizza. You also need to invest in their skill development, like training programs, mentorship opportunities, creating a culture where people are constantly learning and growing.
Ah, I see. So it's about providing that support on both sides, helping people develop their skills and also fostering a motivating environment. That's pretty powerful.
Right. And on the other hand, even if someone is super skilled and capable, they might not perform well if they're not motivated. So things like having clear goals, meaningful work, recognition for good work, that's all super important too.
It's all about finding that sweet spot where someone's talents and their drive kind of line up, I guess.
Hmm.
I'm still curious about those few cases where Aguins did find some interaction effects, though.
Hmm.
Do you think those were just flukes? Or could they actually be telling us something important?
That is a great question. And honestly, the research doesn't give us a clear answer yet. We know those interactions exist. But figuring out what makes them more likely is still kind of a mystery, which is part of what makes this whole topic so fascinating, right?
Yeah, it's like we've discovered this hidden door, but we don't know what's on the other side yet. Spooky.
Right. But this is what we do. We explore those uncharted territories. And this debate has really pushed the field forward, challenged a lot of old assumptions, and opened up new avenues for research.
Maybe some of our listeners out there will be the ones to make those big discoveries. Who knows?
Exactly. So pay attention to those situations where someone's skills and motivation seem to be feeding off each other in a really powerful way. Like when someone is truly excelling, there might be a pattern there, something we can all learn from.
We're all detectives now. This has been such a cool deep dive so far. We've really challenged some traditional thinking, explored some cutting-edge research, and even come up with some new questions.
And we're not done yet. In the final part of our deep dive, we're going to shift gears a bit and talk about some potential limitations of the studies we've discussed and look at some alternative perspectives on this whole ability-motivation connection.
Can't wait. Stick with us, folks. We're going to keep digging. All right, we're back. So we've been talking about this debate over whether ability and motivation have a multiplicative or additive effect on job performance. But before we wrap up this deep dive, it's important to remember that, no study is perfect. There are always limitations.
Definitely. Every study has its constraints. Like the studies included in that big meta-analysis we talked about, they might not perfectly represent every single job out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. Like the tasks people do, the demands of the job, the whole culture of the workplace. That stuff probably influences how ability and motivation work together.
Right. Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. And that's something that needs more research, for sure. Another thing to consider is how they actually measured ability and motivation in these studies. Especially motivation. That's a tough one to really get a handle on.
Yeah, motivation can be so complex. It's not just about how enthusiastic someone seems on the surface.
Right. It's about intensity, persistence, even like the direction of someone's efforts, or all sorts of different angles.
So a study might say it's measuring motivation, but it might not be the specific kind of motivation that matters most in a given situation.
Exactly. And that could make those interaction effects harder to see, even if they are there. Plus, most of the research we've talked about focuses on individual performance. But let's be real, teamwork is huge these days.
Right. So it's not just about how one person's ability and motivation interact. It's about the whole team dynamic. Like,
Sure.
could one person's motivation actually rub off on their teammates and boost everyone's performance?
Totally. It adds a whole other layer of complexity. There's so much more to explore. This debate has really highlighted the need for more research that's nuanced and take into account all these different contexts and levels of analysis.
So it's not really about declaring a winner between the additive and multiplicative models,
Yeah.
right? It's more about acknowledging that we're still learning and there's always more to uncover.
Love that. It's a journey, not a destination. As you continue to learn about this topic, think critically about the research. What are the limitations? Are there other perspectives to consider?
And maybe challenge your own assumptions about how ability and motivation work in your own life.
Yes. So, to wrap things up, it's clear that the relationship between ability and motivation is more like a dance than a simple equation. The latest research leans toward an additive effect, but we still need to figure out those special cases where the two might work together synergistically. So much more to learn.
And we've got to be aware of those limitations in research and be open to different perspectives.
Absolutely. Take these insights and apply them to your own life. Pay attention to those times when ability and motivation seem to create something truly amazing. Maybe you'll be the one to make the next big breakthrough in understanding all of this.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deeper.